Welcome to another video. Today we're going to look at an RPG that is very important to me. What's so special about this one is that it's the very first RPG I ever played. That game is Sword of Vermilion on the Sega Genesis. A buddy of mine rented this back in the day and let me try it out. And I remember really liking the 3D dungeons and the battle system. I also remember accidentally erasing a save file, which I always kind of felt bad about. But yeah, I never got a chance to finish it back then because, my friend had to return it to the video store. I did finally get around to going all the way through the game recently, and we're going to take a look and see how well it holds up today.
Before we do that, let's take a moment here to admire the crappy 80s style box art. The game also comes with a full color manual. Well, it's a full color manual if you're watching this on a black and white TV. It originally came with a 106-page guide as well, but I don't think it's really necessary as this game is pretty straightforward. The story starts off with our hero in a small village. All of the townsfolk tell you to go to your father, Blade. When you get there, he reveals that he is actually not your father, and that you must find the 8 Rings of Good and put a stop to Sarkhan and the Cartagenan Empire. It's basically just a standard tale of good versus evil. It may be simple, but so are many other RPGs released before then. When you leave the first town, you'll notice that the perspective has changed. This game is all about changing perspectives. In town there is an overhead view. You navigate dungeons in the field in first-person view. It switches to an angled top-down view for combat, and then a side view for boss fights. So I guess in a way this is the Philosoma of the RPG genre. Things can be really tough at the beginning. You don't have a lot of money for equipment, and leveling up can take some time. This is pretty common for RPGs of that era though. Battles occur randomly and frequently while exploring dungeons and the world map. You will see one enemy pop up, but when it switches to the battle screen, you can be facing up to 8 of these monsters. This can be hard to deal with, especially when the enemies are faster than you. Luckily, you will only fight one type of monster during each encounter, which makes it a bit easier to dodge. Attacking is done with the C button, and looks kinda derpy at first until you realize that the character is actually swinging his sword two-handed. When you get to the second town of the game called Parm, you can start buying magic spells, which are cast with the A button. These will come in handy when you are surrounded by a bunch of enemies. I enjoy the combat at first, but it is extremely limited and gets repetitive after a while. One thing that could have improved battles would be using the B button to block or dash. A lot of times you'll find yourself surrounded by monsters that are quicker than you, and there's no way to avoid taking damage. Blocking or dashing could have helped greatly with this. If the monsters in any fight are too much for you, just run to the right or the left side of the screen to escape. I usually don't run from combat in any RPG, but there were plenty of times when I was outmatched during a battle and wanted to conserve my magic points, so I took advantage of the 100% escape percentage. It's also possible to get ejected from combat by monsters if you're too close to the edge of the screen and it hits you. If you added up all the times I ran away from battles in every other RPG I played, and compared it to how many times I fled in Vermilion, this game would win by a landslide. It's not that I was underleveled or was bad at the battle system, it's just that many times, fleeing is your best option. The boss fights in this game are really boring. You can't use magic, you can only swing your sword and duck. You can also move left or right, but the movement is painfully slow and makes it hard to dodge attacks. Nearly all the bosses are pretty easy though. When you're not in towns, the game is like one giant maze that you cannot see. You can usually find a map of the region you're in if you talk to the townsfolk, and dungeon maps are usually found at dead ends within the dungeon. Just be sure to select the take command after opening the chest though. This is a major annoyance you'll have to deal with whenever you find a treasure chest. Another thing you'll need for dungeon exploration is a way to light the path. For the first dungeon you'll need 3 to 5 candles. Once you reach the second town, ditch those candles and buy lanterns. Candles burn out after a certain amount of time, but lanterns stay lit the entire time you're in the dungeon. Sword of Vermilion has a dreadfully small inventory limit. This is a problem since you don't have a lot of magic points for healing at the start, and you don't get access to a poison curing spell until about halfway through the game. Not only do you need your precious inventory space for herbs and poison bombs, but you also need to save room for candles or lanterns and key items. With a limit of only 8 items, this can make it hard to manage at times. It would have been great if key items had their own inventory screen. For whatever reason, the level cap in this game is 31. Of all the levels to max out at, why 31? Well, it's a prime number, so I guess that's kind of cool if you're a math nerd. The graphics in the game are pretty dull for the most part. The towns all look similar to one another, and the world map is nothing but the exact same trees and rocks over and over again. Dungeons don't really fare any better, as they are also just the same scenery over and over. Battle graphics are fairly decent, with some nice looking monsters and spell effects. There aren't that many monster designs throughout the game though, so be ready for some heavy palette swapping. The music in Vermilion was really nice and sounded great on the Genesis sound chip. While there isn't a ton of it, most of the music here is well composed. Is it just me, or does this shop theme sound very similar to something from one of the old Final Fantasy games? Anyways, the sound effects aren't the greatest though, and listening to the text when talking to people can get quite irritating. The review of this game was played on the Sega Genesis Classics, a new compilation released on PS4, PC, and Xbone. Sword of Vermilion was also part of the Sega Genesis collection on PS2 and PSP. Of course, you can also get the original Genesis version of the game, which should only cost you about 10 to 15 bucks. I wouldn't advise spending too much more than that, as this is a pretty mediocre RPG. I still enjoyed it, mainly for nostalgia reasons, but also recognize this game's flaws. Would only recommend this if you're a hardcore Genesis or RPG collector. And that will do it for this one. As always, I want to thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you next time.